The alien colony had once been full of life. The cities were made of shining silver towers that touched the clouds, and rivers of light ran through their streets at night. Children played in the open air and music echoed through every hall. But all of that had become a memory. Now smoke covered the skies. The towers that once gleamed had turned into ruins, and the rivers of light had gone dark. For weeks the colony had been under siege. The invaders came without warning, surrounding the planet with a fleet so large that even the night stars disappeared behind their ships. They blocked every signal, every path of escape, and began to burn the cities one by one. The people hid underground, praying that someone, anyone, might come to help. But as the days turned into weeks, their prayers turned to silence. The few who still fought were tired. Their weapons were old and nearly useless against the enemy's machines. They were soldiers in name only now, exhausted, starving, and broken inside. The wounded lay in makeshift shelters, and food was almost gone. Every day the invaders' machines came closer, rumbling across the scorched ground. The people whispered to each other that the end was near. In the heart of the ruins stood an old temple made of stone. Its roof had collapsed long ago, and only the walls remained, but it was where the elders still gathered each night. They lit small fires to keep the cold away and spoke in low voices, afraid that the enemy's drones might hear. They talked about the past, about the worlds that had once traded with them, and the great powers that had promised peace. But no one had come. No message. No sign of hope. "We are alone," one of them said quietly, staring into the flames. "The universe has forgotten us." Around the fire, no one argued. They all knew it was true. Their distress calls had been sent long ago, before the enemy blocked communication. But no reply ever came. Perhaps no one heard them. Perhaps no one cared. In a corner of the ruined temple, a small group of children huddled together. They didn't understand why the sky was always red now, or why their parents looked so tired and afraid. One of the elders, an old caretaker, told them stories to keep them calm. He spoke of distant worlds, of shining ships that sailed through the stars, and of a race so strong and brave that even the darkness feared them. He spoke of humans. The children had never seen a human. To them it sounded like a legend, creatures from a dangerous world, born in storms and raised in fire. Some said they were too violent, too unpredictable. Others said they had hearts so fierce that they never left anyone behind. But no one had seen them in generations. Many believed they had vanished into their own part of the galaxy, refusing to get involved in the endless wars of others. The elders used to speak of humans with both fear and respect. "They come from a death world," one elder once said. "A place where everything tries to kill you." They survived because they learned to fight everything. Their world, their fate, even each other. That's why they are so dangerous. But as the colony fell apart, those words became empty comfort. The humans were only stories now, and stories couldn't stop the enemy's ships. The sky trembled again that night. A deep rumble rolled through the ground as another energy blast struck the outer wall of the city. Dust fell from the temple ceiling. The people froze, listening to the distant sound of explosions. The last defense lines were failing. Soon the enemy would reach them. In one of the underground bunkers beneath the temple, a young technician worked alone in the dim light of a flickering console. His hands shook as he adjusted the controls. Every power cell had been drained, but he had managed to save one small energy core. He knew it wouldn't last long, but it might be enough to send one final message, a desperate cry for help. He connected old wires, reactivated a broken transmitter, and began searching for any open channel. Outside, the sound of falling debris grew louder. He looked up once, hearing the echo of a blast overhead, but he didn't stop. His heart pounded as he entered the coordinates manually. He didn't know where to send it. Most of the networks were destroyed or jammed. Then he remembered something. A forgotten code buried in the archives, one that had been used centuries ago when their ancestors first contacted humans. No one had used it in ages, but he thought it was worth a try. He whispered softly, almost like a prayer. "If anyone can hear us, please help us." Then he pressed send. The console flickered, sparks shot out, and the power core went dark. The message was gone, sent into the void. He didn't know if it had reached anyone. Maybe it would travel forever through space, never to be heard. But it was all he could do. When he returned to the surface, the air smelled of smoke and ash. The sky had turned black, lit only by the glow of burning buildings. He saw people carrying what little they had left, running toward the deeper shelters. Above them, the enemy fleet hovered like shadows blocking out the stars. That night, the colony fell silent. The only sounds were the crackling of fires and the distant hum of enemy engines. Families gathered together, trying to find comfort in each other's presence. Some cried quietly, others just stared at the sky waiting for the end. The next morning, the enemy began broadcasting their message, an offer of surrender. Their cold mechanical voices filled every speaker across the colony. "Lay down your weapons. Your resistance is over. Your world belongs to us now." No one replied. The few remaining defenders took up their weapons anyway. They knew they couldn't win, but they refused to surrender. Somewhere deep inside, they held onto a small, fragile piece of hope that maybe their message had reached someone. But as the hours passed and the bombardment grew heavier, that hope began to fade. In the temple ruins, the elders gathered one last time. The fire had gone out. The old caretaker looked at the faces around him and said, "If this is the end, let us face it with dignity. Let us remember who we were." His voice trembled, but his eyes were calm. Far above, the enemy fleet prepared for the final strike. Their ships aligned, their cannons charging. The colony's surface glowed under the light of destruction. Everything that once stood proud was about to vanish, and yet somewhere in the endless darkness beyond the stars, the faint signal still traveled. It passed through dust clouds, dead systems, and silent beacons. It was weak, broken, and almost lost, but it carried a message that no human would ever ignore. Back on the ground, no one knew. They waited in silence, listening to the low hum of the enemy engines overhead. The technician sat near the bunker entrance, staring at the burning horizon, wondering if his message had meant anything. The air was hot and dry, the smell of smoke thick enough to sting his eyes. He thought of the old stories, the humans who once answered distress calls when no one else would. But even those stories seemed far away now. He closed his eyes as the first wave of light from the enemy cannons began to descend. For a moment, everything was quiet. The fires dimmed. The sky held its breath. And then, from somewhere deep within the void of space, something stirred. A ripple, faint but growing, began to distort the emptiness. But the people on the planet couldn't see it yet. They still believed no help would come. They still believed they were alone. That night would be remembered forever as the moment before everything changed. The moment before a shape emerged from the stars, carrying the symbol of a world that refused to abandon anyone who cried out for help. But for now, the colony waited in darkness, unaware that hope was already on its way. The next morning was colder than usual. A strange silence had settled over the colony, as if even the wind had stopped moving. The sky was filled with dark smoke and the air smelled of metal and dust. The invaders had paused their attack, perhaps to prepare for the final strike. But for the people below, the short silence felt heavier than the noise of war. In one of the underground shelters, the young technician who had sent the signal sat alone, staring at the dim lights above him. The console was dead now, its wires burnt, the last power cell completely empty. He didn't know if his message had reached anyone or if it had been swallowed by the void between the stars. He tried not to think about it, but deep down, he felt that it was gone, just like their hope. All across the colony, people were moving their families deeper underground. The outer defenses had fallen. Only a few bunkers remained, filled with frightened faces and quiet whispers. Some prayed to the old gods, others just held their children and waited. Every time the ground shook, hearts stopped. The people didn't know if it was an explosion or the sound of another ship landing. The elders walked among them, trying to keep order. They spoke words of comfort, though their own voices trembled. "Stay calm," one said softly. "It will be over soon." No one asked what over really meant. Up above, the enemy ships moved slowly across the sky, scanning the ground with beams of blue light. They were searching for the last signs of resistance. The colony's once beautiful capital was now nothing more than blackened stone and twisted metal. From orbit, the planet looked like a scar in space. That night, the people could see the enemy fleet glowing faintly in the upper atmosphere, an enormous ring of ships that surrounded their world like a cage. Every star beyond it seemed blocked out. They had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But while despair consumed the colony, something unexpected was happening far away, in the cold emptiness between stars. "That is so." Weak signal? The one that everyone believed had been lost was still traveling. It jumped between old satellites, passing through dead communication relays, bouncing from one forgotten system to another. Each time it grew weaker, more distorted. Yet somehow the message survived. Please. Anyone who hears us, they're taking everything. It traveled through deep space for days until finally, it reached a small listening post hidden inside an asteroid field. The outpost was human. It was old, quiet, and mostly automated. Just a single operator and a few drones maintaining it. When the signal appeared, it was almost too faint to detect. The computers flagged it as background noise, but one operator noticed the strange pattern. Curious, they isolated the frequency and enhanced the audio. At first, it was just static. Then a broken voice came through, trembling and full of fear. The coordinates were incomplete, the data corrupted, but the distress tone was unmistakable. The operator froze for a moment. The message was old, using a code that hadn't been heard in years. A Terran emergency contact protocol used only by allied worlds during first contact agreements. He didn't waste time. He relayed the signal to the nearest patrol ship in range, a heavy Terran warship on a quiet route at the edge of known space. That ship was named Resolute Onboard. The bridge crew was calm, their screens filled with routine data from the outer sectors. They didn't expect anything unusual. But when the distress signal arrived, everything changed. The message was incomplete, full of static, but the meaning was clear. Someone was begging for help, and they were using an ancient human code. The captain listened in silence. The room went still as the voice crackled through the speakers. Even though the words were broken, the desperation was unmistakable. When the recording ended, the officers exchanged uneasy looks. One of them said quietly, "That code hasn't been used in over a century." Another leaned closer to the console, scanning the partial coordinates. "Whoever they are, they must have found an old Terran network. They're in trouble." The captain looked out at the dark expanse of space through the ship's viewport. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a calm but firm voice, he gave a simple order. "Plot the jump. Full burn. We're going." The crew immediately went to work. Engines powered up, systems came online, and the ship's massive core began to glow with blue light. The Resolute was built for war but had not fired in years. Its armor was thick, its weapons silent, but its heart still beat strong. Within minutes, the coordinates were locked. The ship's systems calculated the jump through the void, a dangerous path through unstable hyperspace lanes. The risks were high, but the captain didn't hesitate. When the countdown began, the engines roared. The stars stretched into lines, and space itself seemed to tear open in front of them. The Resolute vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only ripples of gravity that echoed for miles. To anyone watching from afar, it was as if something enormous had awakened and leapt into the unknown. Back on the colony, no one knew what had happened. They didn't know that their desperate cry had reached the very species they thought would never come. They only knew that the enemy was preparing for their final assault. In the shelters, people clung to each other. The ground shook as explosions echoed across the city. The invaders' ground troops were moving in now, closing in on the last remaining pockets of resistance. The defenders fought bravely but had no chance. Their weapons were too weak, their numbers too small. The young technician sat near the broken console, staring blankly at the dead screen. He felt useless. He had done everything he could, but it hadn't mattered. The sound of distant fighting grew louder, and the air was filled with dust. He closed his eyes and thought about the stars. How far away they seemed, how peaceful they must look from space. Somewhere far above, beyond the reach of the colony's broken sensors, space began to shimmer. A distortion appeared, small at first, like a ripple in water. Then it grew. The distortion pulsed once, twice, then tore open into a glowing rift. The Resolute emerged. It appeared silently, without warning. One moment there was only the cold emptiness of space, and the next, a massive human warship stood between the stars, its armor reflecting faint starlight. The ship scanned the area. The readings were clear. There was a battle below, and the colony was dying. On board, the crew began to prepare. The captain watched the screens carefully as the ship aligned its orbit. "Deploy drones," he said quietly. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Hundreds of small drones shot out from the ship, spreading across the system like sparks of light. The images they returned showed the truth. The burning cities, the broken defenses, the massive enemy fleet hovering above the planet. It was worse than anyone had imagined. For a moment, the bridge was silent again. Then the captain spoke. They called for help, and we heard them. The order went out across the ship. Battle stations, every system came alive. Weapons that had been silent for years powered up. The engines glowed brighter. The hull shields expanded. Deep within the ship, the crew moved quickly, calm but determined. They all understood what they were about to do. They were not just responding to a distress call. They were answering a promise that humans never ignored cries for help no matter how far away they came from. Back on the colony, the people still believed no help was coming. They couldn't see the massive warship now entering orbit above them. They only saw the red glow of destruction growing brighter on the horizon. But that was about to change. Far above, the Resolute's main guns began to charge. The light from its weapons was like dawn breaking through the darkness. In the next moments, the sky would change forever. The people below would look up and see something they never expected to see again. A human warship, emerging from the void, bringing with it not fear, but hope, and for the first time in weeks, the night would no longer belong to the enemy. Far out in the black sea of space, the Terran warship Resolute cut through the darkness like a blade of light. The void around it shimmered with faint blue ripples from its engines. Inside, the crew moved quietly but with purpose. There was no panic, no shouting, only calm focus. They had all seen war before. They knew what they were going into. But this mission felt different. The distress signal had been weak, incomplete, and nearly lost. Still, it had reached them. That was enough. Humans never ignored a call for help, no matter who it came from. The captain stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the holographic map of the system. Red dots filled the display, enemy ships, dozens of them. The colony's planet was surrounded. The enemy fleet had created a blockade, trapping everyone on the surface. Their communications were jammed, their defense grid broken. The situation was desperate. The captain spoke quietly. If we don't act now, they won't last another day. The bridge crew nodded, each person ready at their post. The first officer began running scans. Sir, the fleet's formation is tight. Looks like they're preparing for a final strike. The captain's expression didn't change. He simply replied, Then we strike first. Orders spread through the ship. Massive engines adjusted course, bringing Resolute closer to the planet. Deep in the hull, railgun coils began to glow as energy surged through them. The ship's reactor pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and strong. From orbit, the planet below looked wounded. Flashes of fire where cities once stood, long trails of smoke reaching into space. Even from this distance, the destruction was visible. The crew stared silently at the screen. One young operator whispered, How long have they been fighting alone? No one answered. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, the people were hiding in ruins. The ground trembled again as enemy bombardment continued. The invaders were preparing to destroy the last shelters. In one bunker, the technician who had sent the distress signal sat beside a dying generator. He didn't know that above his head, the most powerful warship ever built was now moving into position. He thought the end had come. But space itself was beginning to change. The enemy's long-range scanners picked up strange readings. A sudden distortion near the outer rim of the system. The commanders dismissed it at first, assuming it was a malfunction. But then the readings grew stronger. The distortion expanded into a massive ripple. One of the enemy officers shouted, Something's coming through. The next instant, the void tore open. Out of the rift, a dark shape emerged, sleek, massive, silent. Its hull was black with streaks of burn marks from past battles. The symbols of Earth glowed faintly on its sides, half hidden by shadow. The Terran warship Resolute had arrived. For a few seconds, even the enemy fleet froze. No one moved. They had heard stories of human warships, ghosts that appeared from nowhere, engines that tore space itself apart, but few had actually seen one. Then, the silence ended, the Resolute's railguns charged, and a pulse of light brighter than the sun flashed through the darkness. The first projectile struck an enemy cruiser head-on. It didn't just explode, it disintegrated, breaking apart in a burst of molten fragments. The shockwave rippled through space, throwing nearby ships off balance. Before the enemy could recover, the Resolute fired again. Then again. Each shot was precise, ruthless, unstoppable. In moments, 3 enemy ships were gone, reduced to drifting wrecks. On the planet below, people looked up in confusion as the night sky began to change color. The bright flashes of explosions painted the clouds with light. For the first time in weeks, the sound above wasn't of falling bombs, but of something else, something powerful fighting back. A child pointed upward, asking, "What's happening?" An elder stared at the sky, her eyes wide. Someone's fighting them. Someone powerful. Back in orbit, the enemy fleet scrambled to respond. Their ships turned to face the newcomer, launching missiles and energy blasts. But the Resolute was faster. It shifted positions smoothly, evading attacks with impossible precision. The human gunners worked silently, coordinating through hand signals and calm words. Each target that appeared on their screens was locked, analyzed, and destroyed. The crew had trained for years, but this was the moment that gave their work purpose. The captain stood unmoving, watching as the battle unfolded. "Target their command ship," he said quietly. The tactical officer nodded and began adjusting the coordinates. The Resolute's long-range cannons rotated slowly, their energy building to dangerous levels. Then, with one thunderous shot, a beam of light pierced through the void and struck the enemy's flagship. It broke apart like glass. The explosion that followed was massive, lighting up the entire battlefield. Fragments of metal scattered across orbit, spinning into the planet's atmosphere. Down below, people gasped as fiery debris streaked across the sky like falling stars. To them, it looked like a miracle. Within minutes, the enemy fleet was in chaos. Their communications jammed, their formations shattered. Some tried to retreat, others continued firing blindly. But the human warship kept moving, its path cutting through the center of the enemy lines. One by one, the invaders fell. Inside the Resolute, the crew stayed focused. They had seen battles before, but there was something haunting about this one. They weren't fighting to conquer or claim territory. They were fighting for a world that had already lost everything. After 20 minutes of relentless combat, the space around the planet grew quiet. Only a few broken ships remained, their engines burning weakly as they drifted away. The human warship slowed, its weapons cooling down, the blue glow of its engines softening. The captain finally spoke again. "Open a channel to the surface." The communication officer adjusted the frequencies. Static filled the speakers, then cleared. A faint voice came through, a trembling, disbelieving voice from the colony. "Who? Who are you?" The captain replied simply, "This is the Terran ship, Resolute. We received your call." For a moment, there was silence on the other end. Then the voice returned, shaky and full of emotion. "We thought no one was coming. We thought we were alone." The captain's tone softened. "You're not alone anymore." On the surface, people began to emerge from the shelters. The smoke still covered much of the sky, but through the cracks they could see something new. High above the clouds, a shadow moved slowly, steady and calm. A single light blinked from its hull, reflecting across the clouds like a promise. Children pointed, smiling for the first time in weeks. The elders stood in silence, tears in their eyes. They had believed no help would ever come. They had given up hope. Yet now the proof was above them, a warship that had crossed the void just to answer their call. The Resolute maintained its orbit, scanning for any remaining threats. The captain watched as rescue drones deployed, heading toward the planet's surface. The mission wasn't over. They still had to rebuild, to save the wounded, to bring stability. But the worst was over. On the ground, the young technician stood outside the bunker, staring at the sky. He saw the faint shimmer of the massive ship among the clouds and couldn't believe it. He whispered softly, "Someone heard us." The people around him followed his gaze, and for the first time they didn't feel afraid. Up in orbit, the Resolute's engines hummed quietly as the crew began preparing to land support teams. The captain turned off the battle screens and looked out into the darkness beyond the planet. The stars were shining again. For everyone on that ship and for the survivors below, this moment would never be forgotten. It wasn't just a battle won. It was proof that even across the endless cold of space, compassion could still travel faster than fear. They had believed no help would ever arrive. And yet out of the void a human warship had appeared, silent, powerful, and full of heart. It was the beginning of hope's return. The battle in the sky had ended, but the world below was still burning. Smoke rose from every direction. painting the horizon with shades of gray and red. The people of the colony stood among the ruins, looking up at the clouds where flashes of light had once filled the night. They could still hear faint thunder-like echoes from above, but they didn't yet know what had happened. When the first wave of debris began to fall from the heavens, many thought it was another attack. People ran for cover, clutching their children, hiding behind broken walls. But then someone noticed that the falling lights were not bombs. They were pieces of enemy ships burning as they entered the atmosphere. The invaders' fleet was gone. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence that followed was strange, almost too big for the ruined world around them. It was the kind of silence that made hearts race because it didn't feel real. Then, far above the clouds, something large moved. The survivors saw it, a shadow passing slowly across the sky. It wasn't like the enemy ships that had terrified them for weeks. This one moved differently, steady and calm. Its lights blinked in soft patterns, and for a moment the whole planet seemed to hold its breath. That was when they realized the ship above them wasn't an enemy. It was the same vessel that had turned the tide of battle only hours ago. It was human. The Resolute hovered silently in orbit, its hull still glowing faintly from the heat of battle. Inside, the crew worked quickly, scanning the surface for signs of survivors. The captain stood by the observation window, watching the planet below. Fires burned across continents, cities were shattered, and entire regions were covered in smoke. The sight was painful, even for someone who had seen many wars. "Status report," he said quietly. "Enemy fleet destroyed or in retreat," the officer replied. "Surface readings show life signs in multiple sectors. Civilian shelters intact but damaged," the captain nodded. "Prepare landing teams. We're going down." The crew moved efficiently. Dropships were loaded with supplies, medical kits, food packs, tools, and repair drones. The humans weren't coming to claim victory. They were coming to help rebuild what was left. As the first dropships descended through the atmosphere, the survivors below could see streaks of light moving across the sky. People stepped out of the ruins and watched in silence. For weeks they had seen only fire raining down from above. Now, for the first time, the lights came not to destroy, but to save. When the human landing craft touched the ground, the air stirred gently around it. The ship's engines hummed softly as the ramp opened. The first humans stepped out wearing suits of armor that gleamed in the smoky light. But they didn't come with weapons raised. Instead, they carried scanners, medicine, and water. The survivors hesitated at first, unsure whether to approach. Then one of the humans knelt down and handed a small child a bottle of clean water. The child's mother watched with wide eyes as the human smiled gently and nodded for her to take it. Slowly, more people began to come forward. The landing team spread out, setting up medical tents and power generators. They treated the wounded, repaired damaged shelters, and helped clear debris. To the aliens, the humans seemed both strange and familiar. Their movements were strong and confident, yet every action showed care. They didn't speak the same language, but kindness didn't need translation. As night fell, the humans built small lights around the camps. The survivors gathered near them, warming their hands, listening to the low hum of the machines that now provided power again. For the first time in weeks, the colony wasn't in total darkness. Above them, the Resolute continued to circle the planet like a silent guardian. Communication lines began to reopen, and other human ships started to arrive, bringing more aid. Inside one of the tents, the young technician who had sent the desperate message sat beside a medic, trying to process everything that had happened. He still couldn't believe it. His message, the one he thought had vanished into nothing, had reached the humans and they had come. He looked at the medic working beside him and said quietly, "We thought no one could hear us." The human paused for a moment, checking a patient's vitals, and then replied softly, "We hear more than you think." Outside, people were beginning to smile again. Children played among the repair drones, watching them float around fixing broken walls. Elders sat quietly whispering prayers of thanks. The world was still scarred, but now it felt alive again. In the following days, the humans worked alongside the colony's survivors to rebuild. They brought advanced machines that could purify air, clean water, and repair communication systems. The colony's main generator, once destroyed, was replaced with a compact fusion core from the human ship. When it powered up, a wave of light spread through the streets and people cheered. The captain of the Resolute eventually came down to the surface. He walked through the camp, speaking little, just observing the work being done. When he met the colony's council, they bowed their heads in gratitude. One of them said, "We thought your kind had forgotten us." The captain replied simply, "We don't forget calls for help. Not anymore." His words carried weight. Long ago, humans had turned inward, tired of wars and politics across the galaxy. Many worlds believed they no longer cared about anyone else's problems. But now, standing on this broken world, the truth was clear. Humans had changed. They were still the most dangerous species in the galaxy, but their strength was no longer used only for war. It was used to protect. Everywhere the humans went, they worked tirelessly. They didn't ask for rewards or praise. They didn't raise flags or make speeches. They simply repaired, healed, and moved on to the next area in need. One evening, as the sun set behind the blackened hills, the technician climbed to the top of a ruined building. From there, he could see the human ship high above, a faint light moving slowly through the clouds. Around him, people were rebuilding homes, clearing debris and planting the first seeds in the soil again. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the sound of laughter and voices. It didn't sound like a broken world anymore, it sounded alive. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the stars coming out. The sky, once filled with enemy ships, was clear again. Among those stars, he could still see the faint outline of the Resolute, a reminder that they were no longer alone. Over the next few weeks, the humans trained local engineers and medics, leaving behind equipment and communication links so the colony could rebuild on its own. When the time came to leave, the people gathered near the landing site to see them off. They brought small gifts, handmade tokens, pieces of art, simple words carved into stone. The captain accepted them quietly, then looked out at the faces before him. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "You survived the worst. The rest will be easier." The colony's people watched as the humans boarded their ships. The engines began to glow and the air shook slightly as the ships rose slowly into the sky. The crowd stood in silence, watching the lights grow smaller until they vanished into the clouds. For a long time, no one moved. Then an elder spoke softly. "They came from the stars when we had no hope left, and they left us with something even stronger than protection. They gave us belief again." That night, the colony lit small lanterns across the hills in honor of their rescuers. The sky shimmered with tiny lights reflecting in the broken rivers below. It looked as if the stars themselves had come down to watch. High above, the Resolute turned one last time before jumping to hyperspace. Its engines flared, and in a burst of light it vanished back into the endless dark. But for those on the planet, the memory remained. They would tell the story to every generation, the story of the day when they believed no help would come, and then a human warship appeared out of the void. It became more than a story. It became a promise, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, when everything seems lost, there are still hearts brave enough to answer a call for help. And somewhere out in that great sea of stars, those hearts were human. The day after the humans arrived, the planet felt different. The smoke still hung thick in the air and the ruins of cities stretched across the land, but there was now a quiet sense of hope. Survivors emerged from shelters slowly, unsure if this new presence was real. They had been alone for so long it was almost impossible to believe that someone had come to save them. The first humans to walk among them did not carry weapons. Instead, they carried tools, medical kits, and supplies. Their steps were deliberate, their faces calm and steady. Everywhere they went, they helped. They lifted debris, guided the wounded to safety, and repaired damaged structures. Children who had not laughed in weeks began to follow them at a safe distance, fascinated by these strong, silent visitors. The invaders' fleet had been scattered and destroyed, but some of the smaller ships had tried to flee. The humans tracked them from orbit, making sure that no enemy could return to finish the job. Every vessel that had caused fear for weeks was now either destroyed or incapacitated. The planet was no longer under immediate threat. The survivors gathered in what remained of the central square. There was a sense of disbelief in the air. They had lived through weeks of fire and bombardment, watching their homes collapse and their friends disappear. And now humans, beings they had only heard stories of, stood among them, calm and powerful, without showing any desire to punish or conquer. One of the elders spoke to the newcomers, his voice trembling slightly. "We thought all hope was gone. We had no one left. And yet you came. A human medic kneeling beside a small injured child looked up and said softly, "We never ignore a call for help. Not if we can do something about it." The simple words carried a weight that made the elder pause. He had seen many worlds fall, many wars destroy everything they had worked for, and he had long believed that no one cared about their suffering. But here now he saw the truth. Someone had heard them. Over the next hours, more humans landed across the planet. Dropships glided down, carrying water purifiers, medical supplies, and engineers who began assessing the most urgent needs. They worked quickly but carefully, ensuring that no further harm would come to the people they were helping. In the shelters, families began receiving water, food, and blankets. The children, once pale and weak from hunger, started to eat and drink under the careful eyes of human medics. Their laughter returned in small bursts, a sound almost forgotten. Elders helped to organize the survivors, guiding them to the new supplies and making sure everyone had shelter. The young technician who had sent the distress signal was finally allowed to speak with the humans who had responded. He stood nervously as the captain approached. "Your message?" "It reached us," the captain said quietly. "It was broken, incomplete, but we understood." "We knew you needed help." The technician's eyes widened. "I thought it would be lost forever. I thought no one could reach us in time." The captain shook his head. "No one is ever truly unreachable. Not if we can do something." It was a moment that shifted something inside the technician. For weeks he had felt helpless, crushed under the weight of despair, but now seeing the humans working tirelessly among the ruins, he realized that even in the darkest times, help could arrive. As the day wore on, the humans set up temporary command centers and field hospitals. They organized patrols to secure the area from any remaining enemy threats. Their drones repaired bridges, cleared debris from main roads, and restored electricity to key areas. Slowly, the city began to breathe again. The survivors started to work alongside them. At first, they were hesitant, unsure how to help without interfering. But the humans encouraged them, teaching them how to use the machines, repair structures, and administer basic medical care. The colony, which had felt like a place abandoned by the universe, began to move again. At night, the humans set up lights around the encampments. The glow of electricity illuminated the faces of people who had been living in darkness for weeks. Children played under the lights, their laughter ringing out across the ruins. Elders told stories again, now about survival, hope, and the beings who had come from the stars to protect them. Even the skies seemed to change. For weeks, the people had feared looking upward, expecting only the glare of enemy weapons. Now, when they glanced at the heavens, they saw the Resolute and other human ships hovering in orbit. A quiet reminder that they were safe, at least for now. The humans did not take over. They did not demand gratitude or control. Instead, they encouraged the colony to lead their own recovery. They shared technology, medical knowledge, and strategies for rebuilding, always careful to respect the people's culture and ways of life. The young technician was assigned to help with communication systems. He worked closely with human engineers, learning how to repair long-range transmitters and restore contact with nearby systems. Slowly, the colony began to send messages to other worlds, sharing news of survival and rebuilding. Through these days of rebuilding, small acts of kindness left a lasting impression. A human medic helped a family repair their home. A dropship pilot carried water to those who could not reach the main distribution points. Engineers repaired playgrounds where children could safely play again. Every gesture reinforced the idea that the humans had not come for power or glory. They had come simply to help. As the colony grew stronger, the bond between humans and survivors deepened. The elders watched quietly as their people regained confidence, learning to use the tools and technology the humans had brought. Children followed the engineers, fascinated by the machines and eager to learn. Slowly, the planet's pulse returned, steady and strong. The captain of the Resolute visited again, walking through the streets, observing the progress. He spoke to people only when necessary, mostly allowing the actions of his crew to speak for themselves. Every repair, every act of care, was a message louder than words. Humanity did not abandon those in need. By the end of the first week, the colony had begun to resemble a functioning city again. Roads were cleared, shelters repaired, and water flowing once more. Food distribution was organized, medical care ongoing, and communication links restored. The survivors had learned to work with the humans, to trust them, and most importantly, to believe that their world could survive. One evening, as the sun set behind the ruined hills, the technician climbed to a small overlook. From there, he could see the lights of the encampment and the faint shimmer of the Resolute above the clouds. The children played among repaired streets. Elders spoke quietly with medics, and families moved together toward safer areas. He realized then that the humans had not only saved their lives, they had restored their sense of community, of hope, of future. The colony had once thought it was alone, abandoned, and destined for destruction. Now it had been reminded that even in the darkest of times, someone could answer the call even from the void of space. High above, the human warships continued to monitor the system, ensuring no new threats emerged. The Resolute remained a silent guardian, a reminder that the people of this world were not forgotten. The colony knew that if danger returned, these humans would be there again, ready, capable, and willing to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. For the survivors, the memory of fear gradually faded. In its place grew something stronger, courage. They had seen what was possible when someone listened to their pleas. They had witnessed power used not for domination, but for protection. And they had learned that help could arrive even when it seemed impossible. As night fell across the planet, lanterns glimmered across the rebuilt streets. Children laughed quietly in the repaired playgrounds, families shared meals, and elders spoke of the day humans appeared from the void to change everything. The technician looked up at the stars and whispered, "We were never alone." Not really. The humans had gone beyond a simple rescue. They had left behind a promise that in the vast darkness of space, no call for help would go unanswered. The survivors would carry this lesson forever, telling it to the next generation, teaching them that even in despair, courage and compassion could come from the unlikeliest of places. The colony was still scarred, still in need of rebuilding, but it had life again. And at the heart of that life was the knowledge that humanity, fierce and powerful, had once crossed the void to protect them. That knowledge was more valuable than any weapon. It was hope, and hope, they realized, could never be destroyed. The colony had survived the worst of its ordeal, but the scars of war were everywhere. Cities that once gleamed with lights now stood as ruins, blackened by fire and bombed to unrecognizable shapes. Streets were cracked, buildings collapsed, and the air still smelled of smoke and burnt metal. Yet among the devastation, life began to return. The people had learned that survival was not just about hiding from danger, it was about moving forward, even when everything seemed lost. From the very first moment the human warship Resolute had appeared in orbit, hope had returned. Its presence had not just ended the immediate threat of the enemy fleet, it had given the survivors the courage to rise from the rubble. Humans had arrived not to conquer but to save. Their ships, powerful and imposing, had shown that even across the endless void of space someone was listening, someone cared. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Human teams worked tirelessly, repairing essential systems first. Water purification units were installed in the central districts, bringing clean water back to thousands of people who had gone weeks without. Field hospitals were set up where there had once been marketplaces and public halls. Doctors and medics moved with precision, treating wounds, tending to disease, and providing comfort to those who had endured more than anyone should have. Children were the first to notice the change. They ran through repaired streets, their laughter echoing in the empty corridors of ruined neighborhoods. They played near repair drones, fascinated by the machines that lifted debris or repaired broken walls. Some children helped carry small loads of supplies, their tiny hands guided by patient human instructors. For the first time in weeks, the world felt safe to them. Elders and adults worked alongside the humans, slowly regaining their skills and confidence. Engineers who had once tried to defend the colony with outdated weapons now learned how to operate advanced machinery. Medics shared knowledge, teaching local healers how to sterilize equipment, administer injections, and treat injuries more effectively. The humans were careful not to dominate or take control. They guided, they instructed. But the colony was rebuilding itself with its own hands, supported by the visitors from the stars. One day, a human engineer led a small group of survivors to the outskirts of the main city, where the most damage had been done. Entire neighborhoods had been flattened, and the ground was littered with twisted metal and broken stone. The humans began organizing the debris, using machines to lift massive pieces of concrete and steel. The survivors followed, slowly learning how to work together to clear paths and salvage what could be saved. Among them, the young technician who had first sent the distress signal moved carefully, still amazed by what had happened. He had felt helpless for so long, trapped under the weight of despair. But now, walking among humans, seeing them work tirelessly without complaint, he understood that action, even small action, could change everything. He learned to operate a repair drone, guiding it to lift a fallen beam from a collapsed structure. Each successful task gave him a new sense of purpose. In the evenings, the humans and survivors gathered together. Small fires were lit in cleared areas and people shared stories of survival. The humans listened, asking questions, learning about the colony's culture and history. The survivors, in turn, listened to tales of humanity, of worlds conquered by adversity, of ships that had traveled through the void to save the helpless, and of people who had refused to leave anyone behind. These stories inspired the colony, showing that bravery and compassion could exist even in the harshest of worlds. Over the next few weeks, the repair and rebuilding efforts grew more ambitious. Roads were cleared, homes reconstructed, and small farms planted where open land allowed. Humans taught the survivors how to use advanced water systems and energy grids, creating a foundation for the colony to thrive once more. Slowly, life returned to the streets. People exchanged smiles instead of fearful glances. Laughter began to fill the empty halls and children ran freely, no longer afraid of falling debris or enemy patrols. Even the night skies seemed to respond to the change. Where once there had been only the threat of enemy ships and the glow of fire, now there were quiet, watchful human vessels orbiting the planet. Their presence was reassuring, a silent promise that no new danger could strike without being seen and stopped. The Resolute remained the most visible among them, a steady guardian that had proven humanity's willingness to answer calls for help. The bond between humans and the survivors deepened through shared work and quiet gestures. Humans carried water to the farthest shelters, helped rebuild homes, and taught children how to read and repair small machines. Their actions spoke louder than words, showing the survivors that strength could be used to protect, not just destroy. The colony learned that trust was possible again. One day, the young technician walked through a section of the city where the humans had focused on restoring communications. The antennas and transmitters, once broken or destroyed, now glowed with soft light, sending signals across the planet and beyond. The technician felt a deep sense of relief, realizing that the colony could now reach out to other friendly worlds for assistance, trade, and support. Humanity's arrival had not only saved their lives, it had given them a chance to thrive again. At the same time, human teams continued patrolling the outskirts, ensuring no remnants of the enemy could reorganize. Small skirmishes with remaining enemy drones were brief but decisive, as humans neutralized threats efficiently without harming the local population. The survivors watched in awe as the humans moved with precision, their actions a blend of power and care. By the end of the first month, the colony was no longer just surviving. It was recovering. Streets were cleared, homes repaired, and fields planted. Children played safely, adults worked with renewed purpose, and elders walked freely among the rebuilt neighborhoods. For the first time in weeks, the planet felt like a home again, not a battlefield. The humans did not linger unnecessarily. Once they ensured the colony could sustain itself and defend against any minor threats, they prepared to leave. The day of departure arrived with a mix of emotions. The survivors gathered to watch as the dropships and warships rose into the sky. Lanterns were lit across the rebuilt streets, glowing softly in the evening light. Families stood together, children waved, and elders bowed their heads in gratitude. Before leaving, the captain of the Resolute spoke to the colony's council. "We came because we heard your call," he said. "We came because no one should ever be left alone when they need help. Remember this: strength is meaningful only when it protects life. You have the courage to rebuild, and the world you create now will honor those who fought to survive." The ships rose slowly, their engines glowing as they lifted above the clouds. The people watched silently until the lights vanished into the darkness of space. In that moment, there was no fear, no doubt. Only a quiet, steady knowledge that they had been saved, and that humanity's reach, though distant, had made them safe. That night, the colony lit lanterns across hills and streets, each one a symbol of survival, courage, and hope.